Convoy HX-229 was assembling in early March 1943 in Halifax, Nova Scotia, a critical node in the lifeline linking North America to war-torn Britain. The cold Atlantic wind bit at the faces of the merchant sailors and naval escorts as they prepared their ships for the arduous journey ahead. Despite the biting chill, there was a cautious confidence among the convoy's crews. Recent months had brought advancements in escort tactics and technology, improved sonar, more aggressive destroyer patrols, and increasingly effective air cover over the western Atlantic had given the Allies hope that the tide might be turning against the deadly U-boat threat that had plagued the seas since 1939. This optimism, however, was tempered by a grim awareness that the wolf packs prowling beneath the ocean's surface had grown larger and more coordinated. The men of HX-229 could see little beyond the horizon, but there were whispers of massed German submarines preparing to strike. The convoy was vast, over 40 merchant ships laden with everything from food and fuel to weapons and raw materials essential to Britain's survival. Each vessel was a floating piece of the war effort, crewed by men who had long since learned to steel themselves against the ever-present danger of sudden attack. The air smelled of salt and oil, and the creaking of hulls and the clang of rigging punctuated the restless movements of sailors readying for departure. Captains and officers conducted final inspections, their faces set with the weight of responsibility. Below decks, stokers shoveled coal or tended to the engines, the heat from the boilers a sharp contrast to the chill outside. The rhythmic thrum of engines filled the air, a steady heartbeat that promised forward motion into uncertain waters. Escort vessels were assembled as well, destroyers and corvettes equipped with depth charges and sonar, tasked with the daunting job of protecting the convoy from the invisible threat lurking beneath the waves. Their crews were seasoned, hardened by countless patrols and skirmishes. There was a quiet tension among them, a blend of professional focus and unspoken fear. The North Atlantic in March was a brutal environment. Storms could rise without warning, visibility could drop to zero in fog and sleet, and the cold water promised death for any who fell overboard. Yet these men embraced their duty, knowing that the fate of nations depended on their vigilance. As the convoy slipped away from Halifax, the sky was a heavy gray, clouds low and oppressive, mirroring the weight of the task ahead. The ocean stretched endlessly, a churning expanse of dark water mottled by whitecaps and spray. The wind howled around the bridges and superstructures, carrying salt and spray that stung exposed skin. Despite the outward calm, a subtle unease rippled through the convoy. Radio silence was maintained, a necessary precaution, but the lack of communication bred an eerie quiet. Each ship maintained its assigned position in the formation, a vast moving fortress, yet one that felt fragile against the vastness of the Atlantic and the unseen dangers beneath. The men aboard the merchant ships went about their routines with practiced efficiency. Some kept watch on the horizon, eyes scanning for the faintest sign of smoke or the telltale silhouette of a submarine's periscope. Others tended to cargo, ensuring that vital supplies were secure. Below decks, cramped quarters and the hum of machinery provided a steady backdrop, but rest was hard to come by. Sleep was punctuated by the cold, the creaks of the ship settling, and the ever-present knowledge that any sound could herald attack. The psychological strain was immense. Sailors had learned to live with the possibility of sudden, violent death but never became immune to the fear it bred. On board the escort ships, the atmosphere was similarly taut. Officers huddled over charts and sonar readings, interpreting every blip and echo. The crew worked in shifts, their vigilance never waning. There were brief moments of camaraderie, shared cigarettes, terse jokes, the clink of mess tins, but these were always undercut by the knowledge that beneath the waves, the enemy waited. The sonar operators listened intently to the haunting clicks and pings, aware that a single misread could cost lives. Depth charges were loaded and ready, their lethal promise hanging in the air like a specter. Intelligence reports filtered through Naval Command, hinting at increased U-boat activity in the convoy's path. German submarines, operating in wolf packs, had intensified their efforts to sever the Atlantic supply lines. The Kriegsmarine strategy had evolved from solitary prowling to coordinated mass attacks designed to overwhelm convoy defenses. The Allied command, while aware of this shift, struggled to keep pace. Radio intercepts and code breaking offered glimpses of the enemy's movements, but fog and miscommunication meant these warnings were never certain. The men at sea relied on skill, courage, and a measure of luck. The night of March 14th was moonless and cold, the dark sea swallowing the convoy's outlines. The men felt the ocean's vastness press in, a reminder of their isolation. On deck, the wind shredded clothing and whipped spray into faces, while below, engines hummed steadily, propelling the ships through the inky blackness. The vast formation moved like a single entity, each vessel dependent on the others for survival. The tension was palpable but restrained. The men waited, eyes sharp, ears tuned for any sign of trouble. Unseen beneath the surface, German U-boats prowled. The wolf packs, groups such as the Elbe and Stürmer, had gathered in shadowy patrol lines, coordinating their approach through encrypted radio transmissions. Commanders aboard the submarines were tense but determined, aware that their moment to strike was near. Their vessels, sleek and deadly, slipped silently through the water, their periscopes barely breaking the surface. The cold metal of the torpedo tubes reflected faint light as crews prepared for the attack. Months of training, months of stalking convoys, all would culminate in these few moments. As HX-229 pushed onward, the calm was deceptive. Beneath the waves, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test every sailor's resolve. The precarious balance between confidence and caution held, even as danger closed in. The story of this convoy, of the men who sailed aboard her and those who hunted her, was about to unfold, a narrative of courage, loss, and the unforgiving nature of war on the sea. This was the Battle of the Atlantic at a pivotal moment, a battle fought not just with guns and steel but with nerves, endurance, and will. The fate of HX-229 was intertwined with the broader war effort, each ship a small but vital link in the chain that kept Britain fighting. As dawn approached on March 15th, the quiet anticipation would give way to chaos, forever changing the course of this convoy's journey and the war beneath the waves. In the shadowy depths of the North Atlantic during March 1943, the German Kriegsmarine was orchestrating one of its most ambitious and deadly operations in the Battle of the Atlantic. The wolf pack tactic, perfected through months of ruthless experimentation, was no longer a scattered hunt but a well-coordinated assault designed to overwhelm and crush the vital Allied convoys crossing the ocean. Groups such as the Elbe and Stürmer packs had gathered silently beneath the waves, their numbers swelling to nearly 30 U-boats. These submarines, sleek and lethal, moved in careful formation, each vessel a silent predator stalking a moving prize. The commanders of these wolf packs knew that patience was their greatest weapon. Rather than reckless attacks, they favored precision, waiting for the perfect moment to strike together with devastating force. The U-boats operated on an intricate network of radio communications, encrypted by the infamous Enigma machine, allowing commanders in distant headquarters and field leaders at sea to coordinate their maneuvers. As the Elbe and Stürmer packs closed in on the North Atlantic shipping lanes, every transmission crackled with tense deliberation. Commanders weighed weather conditions, convoy speed, and the shifting movements of Allied escort vessels. The ocean was a vast chessboard, and every move had to be calculated, for even a small misstep could lead to destruction. Radio silence was often broken only by brief, coded bursts, giving orders or relaying vital intelligence. Despite these technological advances, the men who manned the U-boats were acutely aware of the risks. The slightest sound or miscalculation could alert enemy destroyers prowling nearby, ready to drop lethal depth charges into the black water. Life aboard a U-boat was claustrophobic and tense. Inside the cramped steel hulls, the air was thick with diesel fumes and the metallic tang of machinery. Crewmen worked in near darkness, their ears attuned to the steady thrum of the diesel engines and the haunting echoes bouncing off the ocean floor. The silence outside was deceiving. Beneath the surface, the water was alive with danger, unseen escorts hunting, mines lurking, and the ever-present threat of depth charges. Sleep was fragmented and fitful, snatched between shifts at the periscope or sonar station. The men bore the psychological weight of their mission, caught between the adrenaline of the hunt and the dread of sudden death. Yet their resolve was steely. They had been trained to endure and to strike decisively. The Elbe pack, commanded by seasoned officers, had been tracking the movements of convoy HX-229 for days. They had intercepted radio signals and decoded preliminary intelligence, piecing together the convoy's composition and speed. These U-boats were not solitary hunters but a coordinated force, each boat assigned a sector of the convoy's projected route. They used a tactic called shadowing, where a single U-boat would quietly follow the convoy at a safe distance, maintaining contact and sending precise updates to the pack. This allowed the wolf pack to converge silently, encircling the convoy before launching their attack. The darkness and stormy seas of early March favored the hunters, masking their approach and complicating detection by Allied escorts. Weather played a crucial role in the unfolding drama beneath the waves. The North Atlantic in March was unforgiving, with bitter winds, heavy seas, and frequent storms. These conditions strained both the hunters and their prey. For the U-boat crews, the violent swells made the already cramped conditions unbearable. Instruments had to be checked repeatedly, periscopes raised and lowered with care, and torpedo launches timed perfectly to compensate for the unpredictable movements of the ships above. For the Convoy, storms could both conceal their movements and threaten their formation. Yet, the U-boat commanders saw in the storms an advantage, a veil behind which their submarines could move undetected. Communication and coordination among the wolf packs were exercises in precision and secrecy. Radio transmissions were kept brief to avoid detection by Allied direction-finding teams, known as Huff-Duff operators. The U-boat commanders often operated under intense pressure to maintain radio silence yet provide enough information to synchronize their attacks. Orders from the BDU, U-boat command, and Lorient were transmitted sparingly, leaving much to the initiative of field commanders. This decentralized command structure relied on experienced captains to make split-second decisions once in contact with the convoy. The tension was palpable, as every decision could mean the difference between sinking vital tonnage or losing boats to escort counterattacks. Throughout this period, U-boat crews maintained a grim sense of purpose. They were well aware of the stakes, not only their own survival but the broader strategic importance of their mission. Each merchant ship sunk was a blow to Britain's capacity to wage war, a step closer to severing the Atlantic lifeline. This knowledge sharpened their resolve but also cast a shadow over their daily lives. The men understood the thin line between hunter and hunted, knowing that Allied technological advances such as improved radar and the increasing presence of long-range aircraft made every patrol more perilous. Still, the wolf packs pressed on, their silent approach a testament to the deadly game of cat and mouse that defined the Atlantic War. As March 14th and 15th approached, the Elba and Sturmer packs closed their noose around Convoy HX-229, preparing to unleash a coordinated barrage of torpedoes in what would become one of the largest and most intense convoy battles of the war. The submarines slipped into position under cover of darkness and storm, engines barely audible above the roar of the sea. The commanders' faces, illuminated only by the faint glow of instrument panels, were set with grim determination. Every crewman knew the coming hours could decide the fate of the convoy, and their own lives. The hunt was at its zenith, and the silent predators of the deep waited for the signal to strike. The night of March 14, 1943, over the vast, cold expanse of the North Atlantic, brought with it a chilling darkness that swallowed the horizon and masked the immense danger lurking beneath the waves. Convoy HX-229, a massive formation of merchant vessels laden with supplies crucial to Britain's survival, pressed onward through the storm-tossed sea. The rhythm of the ship's engines hummed steadily against the relentless wind and crashing waves, each vessel maintaining its assigned position with rigid discipline. On board, the men were worn from days at sea, yet alert, their senses sharpened by the ever-present threat of the unseen enemy, the U-boats that had stalked these waters for years. The cold bit through clothing and cut like a knife, but no sailor dared lower his guard, for the sea held no mercy. Below decks, the tight quarters offered little respite. Crewmen shuffled quietly through narrow passageways, the metallic clang of shifting equipment mingling with the low groans of the ship's structure. The pervasive scent of oil and salt water filled the air, mingling with the faint stench of sweat and smoke from the galley stoves. Some men tried to catch stolen moments of rest, curled into hammocks or huddled in bunks, while others kept their watchful posts. Eyes scanned the dark horizon for any sign of smoke or flickering lights, ears strained for the telltale sound of propellers or the distant thud of depth charges. The psychological weight was immense, a pressure that seeped into bones and minds alike, for every man aboard knew the fate of the convoy, and perhaps their own lives, could change in a heartbeat. On the escort ships, a different kind of tension prevailed. The destroyers and corvettes formed a protective ring around the merchantmen, their crews locked into a vigilant routine. Sonar operators hunched over their instruments, their faces etched with concentration as they interpreted the faintest echoes that bounced off the underwater terrain. Lookouts scanned the water's surface through binoculars, watching for the slightest ripple or periscope silhouette. The bridge officers exchanged terse reports, their voices low but urgent, weighing every piece of information. The night was thick with fog and spray, the cold wind lashing at exposed skin, and the ship's decks slick with seawater. Every moment was a test of endurance and resolve, with the knowledge that at any instant, the calm could shatter into violent chaos. Beneath the waves, the U-boat commanders held their breath, their vessels positioned in deadly formation around the convoy. The wolf packs, Elba, Sturmer, and others, had converged for what would become a coordinated assault. The men inside these steel coffins moved silently, muscles taut with anticipation, fingers poised over torpedo controls. The diesel engines hummed quietly, mingling with the distant roar of the storm above. These submariners had stalked their prey for days, shadowing the convoy's path with relentless patience. The moment to strike was near, and every man aboard knew the immense pressure that rested on their shoulders. Their survival depended on swift, decisive action, but so too did the success of their mission, a mission that could turn the tide of the Atlantic War. As the clock edged past midnight on March 14th into the early hours of March 15th, the tension reached a breaking point. The first torpedo found its mark with a sudden, explosive force that shattered the silence and sent a column of seawater and flame into the night sky. The impact rocked the targeted merchant ship, tearing through its hull with brutal efficiency. Screams echoed across the water as men scrambled for lifeboats, or clung desperately to debris. The convoy was thrown into disarray. Alarms blared across the escort vessels as officers shouted orders to battle stations. Depth charges were readied, guns swiveled into position, and lookouts scanned feverishly for the attacking submarines. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming, a stark contrast to the measured discipline of hours before. For 7 minutes, the convoy was subjected to a relentless barrage. Torpedoes streaked through the water like deadly missiles, exploding against hulls and sending shrapnel into the night. Merchant ships burned, listing or sinking beneath the waves. The frantic cries of men fighting for survival mingled with the harsh commands of escort crews directing damage control efforts and counterattacks. The sea was a hellscape of fire and metal, of human desperation and courage. On the bridges of the escort vessels, officers grappled with impossible decisions: when to hold position, when to pursue the fleeing enemy, and how to protect the remaining ships. The 7 minutes stretched like an eternity, each second thick with fear and fury. Amid the carnage, acts of bravery and sacrifice illuminated the darkness. Sailors threw themselves into rescue efforts, pulling comrades from icy waters and guiding lifeboats away from burning wreckage. Damage control teams battled raging fires, fighting to save their ships from sinking. The relentless pounding of the ocean against broken hulls underscored the fragility of life at sea. The men's faces, illuminated by flickering flames and searchlights, told stories of terror, resolve, and the raw will to survive. Every survivor carried the weight of loss, not only of ships and cargo but of friends and comrades who would never see home again. By dawn, the devastation was clear. Several merchant vessels had been lost to the attack, and others were badly damaged, their crews battered but determined. The escort ships, though strained and tested, had managed to protect the majority of the convoy, preventing a total disaster. The survivors gathered on decks and in lifeboats, their faces drawn and pale in the cold morning light. The sea, which had so recently been a battlefield, now lay eerily calm, the flames extinguished, and the smoke dissipating into the gray sky. There was a solemn quiet among the men, a mixture of relief, grief, and steely resolve. The attack had shattered the convoy's sense of safety, and underscored the brutal reality of the Atlantic War. In the hours that followed, damage assessments were made, and the convoy's leadership began reorganizing the surviving ships. Medical teams tended to the wounded, while others set about repairing what they could. The psychological toll was heavy. Many men grappled with shock and exhaustion, haunted by memories of the night's violence. Yet there was no time for lingering despair. The journey across the ocean was far from over, and the threat of further attacks remained. The convoy pressed onward, its formation altered but unbroken, a testament to the resilience and determination of those who sailed it. This fierce 7-minute assault on March 15, 1943, would become a defining moment in the Battle of the Atlantic. It highlighted both the deadly effectiveness of coordinated U-boat tactics and the resilience of Allied convoy defenses. The human cost was immense, but so too was the resolve to continue the fight. The men who survived carried with them the scars, visible and invisible, of a night when the ocean turned from a highway into a battlefield. Their story was one of courage amidst chaos, endurance in the face of overwhelming odds, and the unyielding will to keep the vital lifeline between continents alive. The morning after the brutal U-boat onslaught on March 15, 1943, dawned cold and gray over the battered remnants of Convoy HX-229. The storm-tossed Atlantic stretched out in every direction, deceptively calm beneath the sky thick with low-hanging clouds. Smoke still drifted upward from the charred hulls of ships struck down the night before, their blackened remains casting a somber silhouette against the horizon. The sea, once a conduit of life and hope, had become a graveyard for men and material. Those who survived were scattered across the convoy's fractured formation, their faces drawn and pale, etched with exhaustion and the silent weight of loss. The scale of destruction was unmistakable. Dozens of merchant vessels either sunk or crippled, while the escorts bore scars from the furious fight to protect them. Yet amidst this devastation, the convoy pressed on, propelled by a grim determination that had become a hallmark of the Atlantic War. Below decks on the surviving ships, the atmosphere was heavy with a mix of relief and mourning. Men tended to wounds, both physical and invisible, as medics worked tirelessly to treat the injured under conditions that were far from ideal. The smell of antiseptic mingled with salt and smoke, while the low moans of the wounded echoed through narrow corridors. Many sailors bore fresh scars or clutched broken limbs, their pain a stark reminder of the night's horrors. Others moved quietly among the injured, offering what comfort they could, their faces lined with fatigue and sorrow. Despite the exhaustion, the crews understood the necessity of pressing forward. The journey was far from over, and the convoy's survival depended on maintaining order amid chaos. On the bridges of escort vessels, officers and crew faced the daunting task of reorganizing the convoy's shattered formation. The attacks had scattered ships, damaged steering mechanisms, and reduced the protective screen of destroyers and corvettes that had once surrounded the merchantmen. Every decision carried weight, balancing the urgency of speed against the need for caution in waters still patrolled by lurking U-boats. Communication channels buzzed with urgent radio transmissions, as convoy commanders coordinated with naval headquarters and air patrol units. The sense of urgency was palpable, but so too was the cautious awareness of the dangers that still lurked. Sonar operators remained vigilant, listening for the faintest echo of enemy submarines. Depth charges were kept at the ready, while lookouts scanned the dark water and sky for signs of renewed attack. The tactical fallout from the battle was immediate and profound. Allied Naval Command conducted rapid assessments, piecing together fragmented reports from ships and aircraft. The losses suffered by HX-229 and the near-simultaneous attacks on convoy SC-122 had exposed glaring vulnerabilities in convoy defense strategies. The wolf pack tactics employed by the Germans had demonstrated the devastating effect of coordinated mass attacks, overwhelming even well-armed escorts. This sobering reality prompted a comprehensive re-evaluation of escort protocols, with an emphasis on increasing the number and quality of escort vessels, improving coordination between ships, and expanding air cover. Radar technology, still in its relative infancy, was fast becoming a vital tool in detecting submarine threats, and efforts to accelerate its deployment across the Atlantic theater were intensified. Air patrols, particularly those flown from escort carriers and shore bases in Iceland and Newfoundland, played an increasingly crucial role in the renewed convoy defense strategy. Aircraft equipped with radar and depth charges extended the reach of the escorts far beyond the horizon, hunting U-boats before they could close with the convoy. Pilots flew long, perilous missions over the freezing ocean, often battling severe weather and mechanical failures. Their presence added a new layer of protection and forced U-boats to remain submerged longer, reducing their speed and maneuverability. The cooperation between naval vessels and air units grew tighter, with improved communication and joint tactics developed in response to the wolf pack threat. Intelligence failures that contributed to the losses also came under scrutiny. Despite breakthroughs in code breaking at Bletchley Park, where Allied cryptanalysts worked tirelessly to decrypt German Enigma communications, delays and gaps in information flow limited the effectiveness of warnings. The U-boats had adapted their communications to avoid detection, and the chaotic nature of the Atlantic theater made it difficult to predict exact attack timings and locations. The lessons learned in March 1943 spurred improvements in intelligence gathering and dissemination, with efforts to shorten the lag between intercepting enemy signals and issuing operational directives. Enhanced coordination between naval intelligence and convoy commanders sought to close these gaps and better anticipate the evolving German tactics. The human cost of the battle weighed heavily on the collective consciousness of the Allied naval and merchant marine communities. The men who sailed these convoys were acutely aware that their sacrifices were part of a larger struggle, one that extended beyond the immediate loss of ships to the broader war effort. Stories of courage and endurance circulated among survivors, honoring those who had fought and fallen. Merchant mariners, often overlooked in official accounts, received renewed recognition for their vital role and extraordinary resilience. Their willingness to face overwhelming odds, harsh conditions, and the constant threat of death was a testament to their commitment. Naval crews, too, reflected on the cost of each engagement, their resolve hardened by experience but tempered by the memory of comrades lost. The battle's aftermath also sparked efforts to improve the welfare and morale of convoy crews. Provisions for rest, medical care, and communication with families were expanded where possible, recognizing the psychological toll of the Atlantic War. Letters, parcels, and news from home became lifelines, helping to sustain the mental strength needed to endure repeated voyages through perilous waters. Commanders sought to maintain discipline and order, balancing strict operational requirements with empathy for the men under their charge. The bonds forged in adversity, between sailors, between escorts and merchant crews, became a vital source of strength. Strategically, the March 1943 attack served as a brutal but necessary lesson. The Allies acknowledged that the Battle of the Atlantic was far from won, and that success would require relentless adaptation. The experience accelerated investments in technology, training, and joint operations that would, in time, turn the tide against the U-boat menace. The costly sacrifices of convoys like HX-229 and SC-122 underscored the urgency of maintaining the vital supply routes that sustained Britain and prepared the way for future offensives in Europe. As the convoy continued its journey across the ocean, the scars of the attack remained visible, both in the damaged ships limping forward and in the faces of the men who sailed them. Yet beneath the surface of loss and hardship, a fierce determination endured. The Battle of the Atlantic was a war of attrition, fought not only with guns and torpedoes but with unyielding will and sacrifice. The lessons of March 1943 shaped the course of the struggle beneath the waves, a testament to the resilience of those who refused to yield to the darkness. In the quiet moments between storms, in the steady rhythm of engines and watchful eyes scanning the horizon, the spirit of that determination burned on, a silent promise that the lifeline would hold. The crushing losses suffered by convoy HX-229 in March 1943 were among the most devastating of the Battle of the Atlantic. But they also became a turning point in a conflict that had stretched on for nearly 4 years. The scale of destruction, over a dozen merchant ships sunk and many more damaged, shook the Allied command and forced a hard reckoning with the evolving tactics and technologies of the Kriegsmarine's U-boat fleets. Yet beneath the grim statistics and shattered hulls lay a hardened resolve. The losses galvanized the Allies to adapt quickly, fueling innovations in strategy, technology, and cooperation that would soon begin to unravel the deadly effectiveness of the wolf packs. What had seemed like an unstoppable tide of German submarines began to recede. By mid-1943, the hard lessons of HX-229 and its sister convoy SC-122 spurred a series of decisive changes. One of the most significant shifts came in escort tactics. The Allies increased the number of escort vessels assigned to convoys, fielding more destroyers, frigates, and corvettes designed specifically for anti-submarine warfare. These ships operated in tighter, more flexible formations, emphasizing aggressive hunter-killer groups tasked not only with defense but with actively seeking out and destroying U-boats. The use of support groups, capable of detaching from the main convoy to pursue detected submarines, added a dynamic element to convoy protection. Escort commanders trained rigorously in new offensive and defensive maneuvers, moving away from purely reactive postures toward calculated, proactive engagements. Technology accelerated this tactical shift. The deployment of improved radar systems transformed the battlefield by extending the escort's detection capabilities, particularly at night and in poor weather. Radar could pick up a U-boat's conning tower or even a snorkel breaking the surface, enabling escorts to close in before torpedoes were launched. Sonar technology was refined to distinguish between different underwater contacts, reducing false alarms and allowing for more accurate targeting of depth charges. Allied air patrols expanded significantly, especially with the introduction of escort carriers, small aircraft carriers that accompanied convoys and launched anti-submarine aircraft. These planes could cover vast stretches of ocean, forcing U-boats to remain submerged and vulnerable for longer periods, limiting their speed and tactical options. Intelligence breakthroughs were equally crucial. The relentless work of codebreakers at Bletchley Park had begun to yield increasingly timely and actionable insights into U-boat movements and intentions. Decoded Enigma traffic allowed convoy commanders to reroute ships around known wolf pack concentrations or prepare more effectively for anticipated attacks. The integration of signals intelligence with radar, sonar, and air reconnaissance formed a multi-layered defense system that increasingly squeezed the U-boat's operational freedom. German commanders found their communications monitored and their strategies anticipated, forcing adaptations that strained their limited resources. The German U-boat fleet, once a seemingly unstoppable force stalking the Atlantic, began to suffer unsustainable losses. By mid-1943, U-boat casualties soared as Allied escorts grew more effective. Submarines were sunk or damaged at an alarming rate, crews were lost or captured, and the morale within the Kriegsmarine's submarine arm began to waver. Tactical innovations by the Allies forced U-boats to adopt more cautious and less aggressive behaviors, undermining the earlier advantage gained through wolf pack tactics. The Battle of the Atlantic, once dominated by the silent, deadly prowling of submarines, slowly transformed into a contest where Allied technology, coordination, and determination held the upper hand. Yet this turning of the tide was not immediate nor without continued sacrifice. The seas remained perilous, and convoy battles persisted into late 1943 and beyond. Merchant mariners and naval crews continued to face freezing waters, violent storms, and the ever-present threat of torpedoes. The psychological toll remained profound, a constant test of endurance and spirit. But the sense of growing momentum and improved protection instilled hope and steely resolve. Each convoy that made it safely through the gauntlet was a triumph, a vital thread woven into the vast tapestry of the Allied war effort. The legacy of these convoys and the men who sailed them endures in the history of the Battle of the Atlantic. The relentless struggle beneath the waves, the unseen battles fought in icy darkness, and the sacrifices made by thousands remain a testament to courage and resilience. The vital supplies that crossed the ocean kept Britain standing, sustained armies preparing for liberation, and ultimately helped turn the tide of the war in Europe. The story of HX-229 and its contemporaries is not just one of loss but of determination, the stubborn refusal to yield to a shadowy enemy beneath the waves and the collective will to keep the Atlantic lifeline open against all odds. The experience of March 1943 crystallized a broader strategic transformation in Allied naval warfare. It demonstrated the essential synergy between technology, intelligence, and human courage. It underscored that victory in the Atlantic was not assured by firepower alone but depended on innovation, adaptability, and relentless resolve. As the war moved forward, these lessons shaped convoy operations and naval strategy across all theaters, proving decisive in the eventual defeat of the U-boat menace and the securing of the sea routes that were the arteries of Allied power. In reflecting on these events, it is impossible to overlook the individual stories woven into the broader narrative, the quiet moments of fear and hope, the acts of bravery under fire, the camaraderie forged in hardship. The men who sailed in those convoys faced an enemy that was invisible but lethal, an enemy that struck without warning and vanished into the depths. Their endurance, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment formed the backbone of the Allied victory. HX-229 stands as a stark reminder of the price paid and the courage summoned in the darkest hours of the Atlantic War. Its legacy is etched not only in history books but in the enduring spirit of those who risked everything to keep the lifeline alive. If you want to uncover the untold stories that shaped history, and experience the raw realities of World War II like never before, subscribe to WW2 Impact now. Every video dives deep into the moments that changed everything, because history isn't just about dates and battles, it's about the impact on the lives caught in the storm. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we bring the past back to life, one powerful story at a time.